Leadership is all about people. So, who better to speak to than my next guest, the managing director of Beaumont People, an award winning recruitment and people services firm? Nina Mapson Bone's career has focused on people extensively, helping leaders to build high performing teams, supporting her own team to develop and grow. And I absolutely love the way that they build the team there at Beaumont People. They're so passionate, so values led, and they deliver really great results. It's a leadership that Nina really supports with the performance of her team. So I hope you really enjoy my conversation with the incredibly generous Nina Mapson Bone. Hi Nina, how are you?
I'm good, thanks Daniel. How are you? Are you a Dan or a Daniel?
Let's go with Daniel, but if you call me at all, that's okay. I'm happy with either. Thanks for making the time. We've got to meet in person. Most of this series I've done virtually, and it's really fun to be able to actually sit down with someone like they're real and have legs and all that sort of fun.
Imagine, who knew we had a bottom half, eh?
That's right. And we're in this beautiful space. We're in Beaumont People's offices here in Sydney. It's a beautiful sunny Sydney day. So thanks very much for making the time.
You're welcome. Great to be here. 29 degrees outside. So
it's
a lovely day, yeah.
So look, let's start by just a bit of your leadership journey.
Sure.
And how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, well, so I came to Australia in 2002. Prior to that, I had various sort of leadership roles, junior roles through university. I was, sports roles, hockey captain, that kind of thing, and was working as a sales leader, doing door-to-door commission-only roles, and then was a team leader, recruiting other people to do commission-based roles, that kind of thing. Worked in a events company as well, conferences in the UK. Came to Australia and entered into recruitment here. Worked for my first ever recruitment role actually with a lady who was my first ever boss in recruitment, who's the person that put me in touch with Beaumont People many years later, also the person that made my wedding dress, ironically. That's a whole nother story. Lots of people worked my way up, became a team leader, became a division manager, became a branch manager, etc., and here I am all these years later, managing director of Beaumont People.
Yeah, and it's such a great organisation. I'd love to explore that a little bit more because Beaumont People's not like every other recruitment agency. Before we get to that, I guess what were some of the lessons you learned along that? Sounds like quite a few side steps, very diverse sort of journey. What did you sort of take away from that I think you've has helped get you to where you are now? It helped you become this position.
Yeah, I think some of the key things. There's been an awful lot of. A big thing for me is just because it's not how I would do it doesn't make it wrong. I say that to myself a lot. A lot. I say it with my husband a lot. Just because it's not how I would do it doesn't make it wrong. It really took me a long time to learn that there's lots of different ways of doing things, and they can all be right. And my way isn't necessarily the right way. Often it is, but not always. and I joke, because often actually a different way of doing something is a much better way of doing something. I've learnt an awful lot. We have a lady in our business called Rebecca Reinhardt who runs our consulting business, and she does a lot of work around strengths. I know you talk a lot about strengths, working to people's strengths, and I've really learnt the value over the years of allowing people to come at something from their position of strength, and the difference that makes. You can often get to the same outcome but via a different journey, and really the value for me as I've got older is appreciating the maturity of allowing someone to come at it from a different angle. That requires patience, and I'm not by nature a patient person, so really having to kind of sit back a bit and try and allow the person to come at it from a different way. Not the way my kind of, often I'm a bit of a bulldozer, so allowing them to come at it their way will actually have a better outcome. If you can kind of guide them but let them go at it their way, it makes a big difference, I find.
It's interesting because it's such a in some ways it's such an obvious thing, but also such an underutilised skill, which is this difference between what we'd call an expert leader, where I develop my skills, and therefore it's my skills that have got me to this position. And so because I've had this very narrow career path, I've accumulated a great pride in my skills in this narrow area, whereas maybe, and tell me if I'm not reading this right, having that diversity means you do see a lot of differences, but also you don't necessarily have that specific built-up expertise, and therefore there are lots of different ways that you can do certain things, and you can explore more.
Yeah, because obvious isn't easy. So it can be obvious, but doesn't mean it's easy to execute. And I reflect on this a lot with self-awareness, because it's really obvious where other people lack self-awareness, but I'm pretty sure it's very unobvious when it comes to ourselves. I think to myself all the time, where am I lacking in self-awareness? Because I must be, because I'm so frustrated very easily by other people's flaws of lack of self-awareness. So I often will lie in bed at night going, where is my lack of self-awareness? I must have it, because I can see it in that person, and I can see it in that person, and I can see it in that person. So where does it sit with me? But that's the point of lack of self-awareness, is that we lack it.
Yeah.
So obvious isn't easy.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was Marshall Goldsmith. I might have this. I'm pretty sure it was Marshall Goldsmith, who's a famous executive coach. He developed the 360 feedback tool, and when he first developed it, he ran it himself, and one of the results that came back was, I think you can be really critical or really harsh in your criticism sometimes. And he said to his team, "Well, that's not true. I don't accept that. I don't think that's true. And to prove it, if you do see me acting like that, let me know and I'll give you $5." So he cancelled that experiment within the first couple of hours, because he wasn't completely unaware, but people kept showing him, "Oh, this is what we mean. This is what we mean." And so even someone who should have high self-awareness, it is a very difficult thing for us to understand. What have been some of the biggest challenges you've faced in that journey through?
I think the hardest thing for me has been trying to separate out two things. I think the first has been trying to separate out intent from behaviour. It took me a long time to realise that just because I was trying to do the right thing, that my behaviour was, didn't mean that was okay. And I remember a situation, my first role as a branch manager, it actually came through from a 360 feedback session, where I really felt like I was doing something very positive and good for my team, and it came back in a feedback session that they were quite unhappy with a situation that I thought I demonstrated quite good leadership skills in. And it was a classic in recruitment, anyone that's ever worked in kind of old school recruitment, and I'm not going to say we never have it in Beaumont people, we try and avoid it, but like any kind of sales-based environment, occasionally it can be a little bit territorial, and particularly in sort of some of the more traditional recruitment companies, in any sales environment can become quite territorial. And it was in a downturn market where there was less business, and in the environment I was in at the time, it was very much a kind of geographical based model with lines of, this is your territory, that's your territory. And another general manager from a different territory had been actively targeting business in my team's territory, and so I had publicly in the open floor picked up the phone to the other general manager and had a very robust discussion in front of my team in what I thought was a good display of protecting my team, looking after their interests, trying to show them that I would look after their interests, and came back in the 360 that they felt that was unprofessional, that they didn't like seeing their manager, kind of being publicly discussing in too robust fashion with another general manager, and they would have preferred for that to have happened behind closed doors, whereas I felt like they would have liked to have seen me stand up for them. So it was an interesting lesson for me in what I thought was the right behaviour, they very much deemed as the wrong behaviour, and kind of separating out that intent from behaviour, and understanding, I guess, different levels of sensitivity. I'm not a particularly sensitive person, and sometimes I forget that other people are. So kind of having to understand that would be one. The other big lesson for me that it's taken me time to learn, I've got much better at, is that it does pay to work hard. And I know that sounds silly because I'm naturally a hard worker, but I didn't used to work hard at things that I wasn't good at. I would only ever sort of put my effort towards the things I was naturally good at, and I just would sort of ignore the stuff that I wasn't good at. Because I had that fear of failure. I think I liked to be good at things. Took me a long time, longer than it should, to realise that I could actually still be really quite good at stuff that I wasn't naturally good at if I put some effort into it. So, and that paid off. But it's not gone badly, right? So let's not complain. But I could have been better in my earlier career if I'd worked harder in my earlier career.
Gotcha. Yeah, and look, it's it's again comes that problem that when we get good at stuff, we want to do more of it, and the more we do, the more praise we get, and so we can sometimes weave ourselves into those little sort of ruts, if you like. What I want to explore is how do you do things differently? Because, as you said, and hopefully not talking out of school, recruitment can be quite a fierce and cutthroat industry. There's often, there's a finite resource that we're dealing with. There's a lot of personalities and differences. There's both the challenge of finding a person versus finding the right person, and making sure that you're sort of working with people to understand what that is, because it's hard sometimes to describe what you want and what's the right person. How do you navigate through that at Beaumont People, and how do you, I guess, more importantly, lead a group of people who are living in that sort of messy, ambiguous space?
Yeah, look, it's not easy, I'm not going to lie, and we spend a lot of time on it at Beaumont People. We've built a whole training program internally, a lot of which is around the technical aspects of recruitment, but about a third of it is around what I call the skill of working, the working effectively topics. We have, I think, 17 topics, which are things like growth mindset, work-life balance, actually how to work the skill of working, how to have difficult conversations, how to deal with rejection, how to give feedback to both clients and candidates. So there's a lot of those soft skills. For me, in our education system, that's lacking, and that's life stuff that's as, if not more important than some of the kind of actual education we teach people through the education system. That's lacking in a lot of our workplaces. So that stuff we spend a lot of time on teaching our people how to talk about. But the biggest piece of that is long-term thinking. That is the piece that is missing across almost all levels. I'll get very philosophical if you let me. That's what's missing across all of our society. It's what's missing in our governments. It's what's missing. It's why we're in the mess we're in climate, in politics, in all sorts of things, because as a human species, we're fundamentally incapable of thinking long term. We go, oh, I want that thing that's right there in front of me right now. Yes. And we're very, very bad at thinking beyond that. But often the thing that's right in front of us right now is actually the worst thing for us in terms of the long term. And that's the same with the sales cycle in recruitment. It's the same with politics. It's the same with economies. It's the same with all sorts of things. Same with diets. You can apply it to all sorts of issues that we have in the world on an individual, on a societal level. So we try and when I apply that to the workplace, then what we try and do is spend a lot of time helping people to think about both, yes, the short-term reward, but also the long-term benefit. So yes, on an individual recruitment person, individual consultant, I might want to place Dan in this role right now because that makes me feel good because I've made a placement, and it makes my client happy because they like me because I've done a good job, and I get the recognition for it, and I might get a commission for it, whatever it might be. But you know what? If it's not the right job for you, Dan, and you're unhappy, you're going to leave, and I'm not going to feel good about that, and the client's not going to feel good about that, and ultimately that doesn't help anybody, you, me, the client. That doesn't create meaningful work. That's not what we're about. It doesn't help grow the economy. It doesn't contribute to a better society. It doesn't kind of build what we're trying to build. It doesn't contribute to where we're going. If it doesn't grow the economy, it doesn't create more jobs. It doesn't create more opportunity. It's not a long-term prospect. So whilst it might be better short-term, it's actually not better long-term. So sometimes we might have to take a little bit of short-term pain to get more in the long-term. So we try and encourage the long-term thinking where we can.
How do you, I guess I want to explore this because this is a topic that I think a lot of leaders struggle with, because philosophically I think everyone would agree, but then we're thrust into what I call the heat of battle. We're in the arena, things are flying everywhere, targets, we've got to hit targets, we've got people who are ambitious, we've got to motivate them. How do you incentivize that long-term thinking? And then the flip side, what happens when we get it wrong? Because inevitably we're all human, we'll make mistakes. How do you manage that, or how do you lead through that?
Well, honestly, the biggest thing that helps us is that we're not a listed company, and it's myself and Nikki. So the only two people that really it hurts ultimately. I mean, obviously, it hurts our people in terms of their short-term incentives. But ultimately, we're not beholden to shareholders in terms of the company performance. The only two people it really hurts is Nikki and I, and we are philosophically aligned in terms of our wanting to contribute to a better society. So we are always on the same page of going, you know what, we'll take the short-term hit for the longer-term gain of trying to do the right thing. So we're lucky that that's never a problem between us. We've always been on the same page. There's never come a point where the greater good hasn't been the decision we've wanted to take. So we're very philosophically values aligned from that perspective. So that's great. That's why we work so well together. So that's one of the huge benefits of not being a listed company. We're not beholden to a share price that we need to hit every quarter, so that helps. It doesn't matter. We can.
so let's say you. Recruitment is obviously your business. You're very good at it, and you have to bring people in. Inevitably, you might bring someone in who they don't necessarily align straight away, or they think they do, but actually that commission was pretty juicy. How do you sort of manage someone or deal with that?
Don't get me wrong, and this is a mistake that sometimes people make. That doesn't mean we don't want to be successful.
No, absolutely.
So that's the other thing is sometimes people come on board and think, okay, so does that mean we are
not-for-profit,
and we have the not-for-profit business,
yes,
and we do absolutely run that at a sort of significantly reduced model in order to give back to that space. But we are still a very commercially astute business that run a very successful business, and we have people in our business that run very successfully and do very well out of the business. So. But the point is, we always say, and what we train people on is that the financial result is exactly that. It is the result of what we do.
Yes.
It is not why we do what we do. We have no shame in it. We absolutely want to do well in it. We don't hide from that, but it is the result of what we do.
It feeds families. It feeds
absolutely, and the more we do of it, the more of the good we can create, and it becomes a philosophically good circle that can actually do more and more and more good, as long as it remains the result of.
Yes.
It can keep feeding.
And so how do you sort of encourage or reinforce those values? Because values is something that I'm really passionate about. I've written a book on it, really keen to make sure organisations have better values. Lots of organisations have values. They don't necessarily, they're rarely remembered, let alone used. How, I guess, if you are a values-led organisation, how do you
embed
that? How do you make that happen?
There's certain things we do, and I'm not going to say it's perfect all the time, because it's not. So the first thing is to call out it's not. We are not a perfect organisation by any stretch, but there are lots of things we do to try and make sure that we always bring it back when it switches too far one way or the other. So one of the things we do is we have a culture charter, and the culture charter outlines our values, and our values are not just the value, they're also obviously a definition of a value, and then under that is a statement of behaviours of what we will and won't do based on those behaviours. And the culture charter is that statement of behaviours, and then once a year we get together as part of our company conference, and everybody's involved in that, and we review those statements of behaviours, and we agree, are we happy with what those statements of behaviours are? And do we think they align with what we're seeing in the workplace, and do we need to tweak the wording on them? And what do we agree amongst all of us we are going to do or not do or change or tweak, and how are we going to call each other out on those statement of behaviours, and we remind each other. So for example, a classic example is we have a person in our business, an access consultant, whose entire job is to look at how we can improve the ways in which we are creating more opportunity for equity, diversity, inclusion and access for workplaces, both externally and internally in Beaumont people. And part of her remit is in our all-staff weekly meeting. She gives tips and tricks internally what we can do to be better at that, and we're on that journey. Again, we've got a long way to go in that space. And she had provided some tips and tricks, and one of those was around how we make sure we have closed captioning on videos. And I had to sit there and say, you know what, I published a video last week and I did not put closed captioning on it, and not a single person has called me out on it, so I'm going to put my hand up and call myself out on it, because I did not do the very thing that we've hired somebody to say that we need to do.
Absolutely.
And if I as the MD am not doing it and nobody feels they can call me out on it, then
there's a problem.
That culturally, that is not living our values right there. So I'm going to put my hand up now and call myself out on it. And now I'm sitting here telling you the story, and that's all well and good, but I still haven't fixed that. So when I leave this, I'm going to go out and fix that right now, for example. So, so we work on these things.
But I think it's really important that what I love about the way you do that process is each year it's not saying what were the words, what were the values, the words we said last year, do we need to change those words? It's instead saying the words are great, what we need to make sure is that the behaviours that are aligned with those values and the expectations and commitments we make to each other are clear so that we know how to work together. And that's I think a really critical piece. But as you said, the next step is, okay, that's great, but if no one calls me out, no one calls each other, if no one's upholding those commitments, then it's really easy for them to fall by the wayside.
It is, and also then by example, that's just one. I could give you about 25 more examples of the ways those values are embedded in our culture. So like, and I'll just rattle a ton off to give you an example.
Yeah.
Monthly we have an award based on values. When we interview people, there are questions specifically, behavioural questions specifically aligned to our values. We have on our internal SharePoint, there's a online values award that anyone can nominate for anyone else at any given point in time. The list goes on and on and on. The values are anywhere and everywhere embedded into almost everything that we do. So,
and again, the reality is, if you don't do that work, people need something to grab onto, and if all you have is spreadsheets of numbers, then they'll grab onto the numbers.
Yeah.
And they'll fascinate on them, and then the behaviours will be whatever I can do to get the result, and then you can fall into that trap, which I think is, again, it's a really, and I think you're really opening about this, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's imperfect, you grapple with it constantly, it's messy, and you get things wrong, but it's the conversations you have after you get things wrong, and it's the way you adapt that is the real key.
Absolutely.
What's a piece of advice you wish someone had given you early on in your leadership journey that would have been helpful for you?
I think that thing around other ways of doing it aren't wrong. Just that it used to astound me that people kind of could see things in others that I couldn't see almost. I think I was a bit blinkered when I was younger. It took me a long time to understand, just that thing of, I'd be kind of going, really, why does that person have so much respect for that other person? I couldn't see it. I mean, I still have that, I can't get my head around how someone like the Kardashians can have so many followers. But people do, and so it's that thing of understanding that different people have different likes and different viewpoints. I've got a lot better at it, but I could certainly still go further.
And perspective take is hard. It's it's almost like the more that we know, the more confident we are in knowing everything, and yet we can't possibly know everything. And that overconfidence is almost, I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, they call it, that we get caught a little bit of knowledge and we think we know it all, and it's actually that dip that you've described that no, there's lots of other ways of doing things, and a little bit of letting go as a leader to not be in control all the time. It's exhausting being in control. It's now a different world, and you're going to be seeing this from clients and from candidates, I guess, that 2019, most people were expected to go into an office, work from an office, be surrounded by their colleagues and work in certain ways. There were many people who said in 2019, my team cannot work from home, they need to be in the office, and we can't possibly do it. That's all in some ways been proven wrong. But what are some of the challenges you're seeing that leaders have now, staring at this world where the rules have changed so dramatically?
Yeah, I mean, the one, it's interesting, we're still grappling in Beaumont, even with the whole who works where, from when. Because we're not an organisation that likes hard and fast rules, but we have grown dramatically. And the bigger you grow, the more need you have for rules, because it becomes harder, to have the flexibility the bigger you get, because, it becomes more difficult to be more flexible when there are 70, 80 of you than when there were 20 of you.
Yes.
The bigger you get, the more rigour you need just for consistency's sake. So that's tricky. We like to try and take a grown-up approach to everything. We talk to clients all the time. One of the lucky things, one of the positions of privilege we have is that we work with so many organisations across so many industries of so many different sizes that we kind of get to cherry pick the good and the bad of what all the different organisations are doing,
yes.
which is fabulous. So we kind of get to different leadership styles, different organisations, different sizes, and we haven't put a hard and fast approach in. We're in a candidate shop market like everybody else, and so where we have said, what's interesting for us, we have said, you know, our ideal is we want people working in the location they're going to physically be based in. That's our ideal, and we encourage people into the office to spend time with people when they're needed, collaborate, be in person. It's great to be in person. We know there's huge benefits from that. Mm-hmm. We know it's much harder to onboard remotely, to do things remotely. We recognise all of those things, but we also understand there are benefits to deep work being done when you need to concentrate, you know, whether that's in the quiet of a room or whether that's at home. So we trust you to make your choice yourself. That said, in a candidate short market, if we have a job that we would ideally like based in Sydney, but we cannot find anyone in Sydney, and somebody from our Byron Bay office has said, I really want to do that job, but I'm not willing to do it from Sydney, but I can do it remotely from Byron Bay, let me do that job. Eventually we've gone, okay, we'll do that job, and that person is doing a brilliant job and proving that they can do that job, but then obviously you go, okay, well, where do we draw the line then in terms of other people and what does that look like? And so, you know, there are nuances to all of these conversations, and they're complex and they're messy, and it's a complex and messy world. And how do we manage those things going forward? We don't know is the short answer. We have robust discussions trying to work out what these things look like. And I don't have all the answers because it's not as clear cut as it used to be. I wish I did have all the answers for you, Daniel, but I don't.
Will do. I was hoping you had them all. It is really challenging because the comfort we get from rules can quickly lead us into a challenging space. And you know, as you said, you can make a hard and fast rule that the world changes, the complexity of the environment changes, and those rules don't work anymore. If you're too flexible, though, if you're too open, then you lose some of the value. How do you, how do you get people to feel the values? Because one of the things with remote work is it's easy to still observe the results, harder to observe the behaviours remotely. How do you still sort of embed, or what are the things you're probably working on in this period to still make sure those values and behaviours are maintained?
So there's a few things that we do. I mean, we still have an all-staff, across everybody, all-staff Monday morning meeting to kick off the week, regardless of who you are. It's, you know, just everybody online, 9 o'clock, the week starts with the all-staff Monday morning meeting. We've never let that go, and we still finish the week with Good News Friday, 3:30 on a Friday, and the whole point of Good News Friday is that you have to find something good that happened with the week so that you go into your weekend sharing something good that happened the week, so you feel like you did something good that week, regardless of your role, who you are, what you did. You know, that's the point of the week, is you go into the weekend knowing that you did something good that week, celebrating the wins for the week. So so those two things are paramount. We have an all-staff company meeting once a month that celebrates the wins, the learnings, the goals, and any updates, birthdays, anniversaries, that kind of thing, you know. So that's a bit of that's where we do the values awards, but we also do the financial results, but it's a bit of an everything meeting, that one. So there's some structure, if you like, around the kind of regular heartbeats of the organisation. But then the teams themselves, they kind of have their own team charters around their kind of what their internal SLAs are, what their communication rules are. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them, for example, will actually, if they're all working from home, they might open up their videos, calls with each other, and just have them open all day as if they're sitting next to each other, even though they're not. I know some of them do that so that it feels like they're sitting next to each other, even though they're not, just to kind of, even they're just tapping away, or they might kind of just bounce ideas off each other, or, you know, those kind of things. Or they'll go and work in each other's lounge rooms together, just to, even if they're not coming into the office, there's a bit of that goes on. We do quite a lot of, still have trainings once a week, things. There's quite a lot of interaction of things that go on to help out. And the other thing is, even though we're not necessarily coming into the office every day, ours is an organisation that requires quite a lot of interaction with our clients and candidates. So they may not be coming in here, but they're going to client meetings together. They're still connecting out there, even if they're not coming physically into the office. Fantastic. So there's still quite a lot of collaboration on things happening, even if it's not everybody together, that it is in sort of units and bits and pieces that way.
And I guess from your perspective as a leader, what complexities or challenges has the remote work from home thrown up that maybe you didn't anticipate, or that you're sort of grappling with still in this time?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest complexities is quite how much learning happened anecdotally. So what we are realising, particularly, so one of the things that we did to overcome the talent short market in our own field was we built what we call the Academy, which was essentially a graduate training program for people without recruitment experience to bring them in. And it's a great idea. It's, you know, essentially an entry-level program. We haven't quite got that right yet. It's worked really well for some of the people coming into the program, but not for everybody. And we feel like we're not perhaps quite explaining the role properly and or training those people as well as we could be. And we think that's partly because they're not in the office and they're not getting that anecdotal learning. If you're coming into an industry like ours with no experience at all and you're not sitting next to somebody, there's an awful lot you learn just by osmosis, just by sitting next to somebody in an office. And when you're coming in and you don't know, and we're encouraging those people to come and be in the office, but if the experienced people aren't in the office as well, it's kind of, so that piece is missing. And that's not through anyone's fault. We're just working out what the solution is there and how we get that better. We're just doing some work on that at the moment because it's a great idea and it's been partially successful. It's partially solved the challenges we have in that space, and we've got some brilliant people through it. But we need to kind of keep moving the dial to continuously improve it and get it even better.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, 80% of the things I learned, like in PowerPoint or Excel or any of those things, you just ask the person next to you.
Yeah.
And now it feels like you've got to schedule a Teams meeting, or you've got to schedule and it's, you know, it just seems like it's a different world for some of these basic things.
It's just even just hearing somebody on the phone, you just kind of go, wow, that's really clever what they just said, right? You don't even, you just pick things up, don't you? Or you're just kind of walking past, or it's just amazing what you pick up, just that sort of...
I agree, and particularly in the values and behaviours space, you know, how they speak to people, the language people use or don't use, the tone of voice, the volume, and all those little things that you'd never train someone to do, but when they're sitting in an open office, they sort of build that sense of consistency. I wonder, there's a lot of opinions on this, and because you're here, I'll ask you now, what do you think is the future of that? Do you think we're going to stay in some sort of a hybrid model? Do you think we're actually going to move further towards everyone working from home? Do you think we're all going to return to offices? Where do you think we might fall on that spectrum?
I think we'll stay hybrid, to be honest with you. I think there's enough benefit of working from home that we won't ever come back full time to the office. I know there are some people that are, I mean, some of our clients are absolutely adamant that everyone has to be back in the office, and that's, you know, that's their right. And some industries, it's just not practical, and I get that. You know, we work with, you know, a lot of our charities in, you know, health and medical spaces where, you know, or some of the kind of blue collar type spaces where you have to be, and I get that's totally understandable. So
mining is a hard
exactly. You know,
job.
exactly. There are certain industries where it's just not practical, and that's understandable as well. But there are certain portions of the population where it's been a huge benefit for them to be able to work from home, and also certain jobs where working in an open plan office is just not practical. I mean, I think about our accountant and her ability to concentrate in an open plan office of noisy recruiters, and I think to myself, how did she ever get anything done? You know, it's probably been much better for her to be able to work from home, to, you know, to concentrate a bit more. So
absolutely. I think it actually, there's a really good point there, which is when people do come to the office to work, you can create more different environment spaces. So, you know, one of the things I think we see is people come to the office, in the past in particular, they'd come to the office, put headphones on and just focus on their own work. Well, if you're going to do that all day, go home. But if you're going to come and interact with people, have conversations, this is the space for it. We create that physical space.
Deep work, collaborative work, I talk about. So do your deep work at home, or you know, we're lucky enough, we've got lots of rooms here.
Yes.
Go into a room to do your deep work, do your collaborative work into the office. Work it out with your teams, come in and do your collaborative work together, be together, bounce off each other, learn from each other. Do your deep work where you need to be in quiet space.
And look, I think it would be remiss of me not to ask this. Given it is a tough recruitment market, it's hard to get people. A lot of people I'm working with, they're saying, I can't afford to lose anyone, which is dangerous in some ways, and it's so hard to find the right people. Maybe they're just getting anyone in. What would you advise on how to attract good people, how to attract the right people, what that sort of balance is in that messy space?
So I could do like a 3-day workshop on this, Daniel, so
all right.
Let me try and give you the short version.
Okay,
So first of all, be really clear on what it is you want, because in a market like this, when it's candidate short and people are under pressure from a work perspective, there's probably the first mistake people make is there's too much of a knee-jerk, just try and, Betty's left, just try and replace Betty.
Fill the hole.
Fill the hole. If it's a quick knee-jerk reaction, if you just sort of put an ad up and hope for the best, because the market's too short, you're almost on the back foot the minute you put an ad up that's the wrong ad or not quite right, and so just really take your time to work out what you want. Take your time to work out what you want, take your time to work out what your sourcing strategy is, who you're looking for, exactly what it is you're after. Once you've really worked out who you're after, what you're looking for, then you almost need to rip that up and go, okay, how much am I willing to flex on that? Because you're not going to get that. But be really clear on what your ideal is. Then work out how much you're willing to flex on that, because you're going to have to, is what I would say. Then work out where is that person hanging out, online and in person, and what's your best way to tap into that, because there's all sorts of ways. Obviously, a recruitment firm is one of those ways, but there's all sorts of ways to find that person. Then go about doing all of that. So there's a lot of pre-work before you go to do it, and then go from there. So do your pre-work first, then make sure also once you're there and you're looking, that your process for actually in the process is really smooth, because if you're then talking to somebody, attracting them, appealing to them, if you mess it up at that point, you've probably only got one shot to get the right person over the line. And then don't mess it up once you've got them on board by having a really bad onboarding process.
Which again comes back to that challenge of, how do you onboard them if they're working from home all the time? How do we really keep, wrap your arms around them? I think it's that when work becomes a set of tasks, then it's easy to do those tasks from anywhere for anyone.
Yeah.
But what I think a lot of people are searching for is a place where they can come and belong. And I think that the beauty that I've seen in working with people here at Beaumont, people, and also hearing how you work, is you care about creating those communities where people feel like they belong, which is a much more impactful and as you said, philosophically long-term play, right? Let's make sure we get this right in the long term. Who's someone you really admire in terms of their leadership?
Well, there's lots of people. I tend to, interestingly, I don't tend to admire, there are lots of people I admire, but I don't tend to kind of hero worship, if that makes sense, in that I don't tend to admire whole people. I tend to admire traits within individuals, because nobody's perfect. We are all flawed human beings. So, there's lots I admire about Nikki Beaumont. There's lots I admire. I mentioned my first ever boss in recruitment, Rhonda, who's the person that put me in touch with Nikki when I first came to work here. But there's lots I admire in, people like Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama. So, it depends, but it's more about sort of the sort of trait within the person than the whole person, if that makes sense. So I look for traits, and I try to emulate the trait rather than the whole person.
No, I like that. It's one of the things, particularly when I'm running a masterclass, for example, I'll say to people, there is no answer. There's no perfect way of leading. There's lots of books, and in all of those books there's great pieces, and there's pieces you should throw away. There's pieces that are great for this environment and context and not for this environment and context, and it is such a complex thing, and I think it's useful to be able to sort of pick those pieces sometimes. Nina, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you for having me in your beautiful offices in this beautiful space, and it's been a real pleasure. And I love that idea that I think will stick with me, that there are lots of ways of doing things, not just my way, not just my way.
It would be easier if it was just my way, but unfortunately it's not always the right way.
It'd be simpler, but it might not meet the complex needs that we live in.
And it wouldn't be better. It would. The world is always better when we bring everyone together and get their contributions. It tends to be a better result that way.
What a wonderful way to end. Thanks so much, Nina.
Thank you so much, Daniel.